Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we finally got out here to do some 20 gauge slug testing. I've got a few different rounds and I finally got a 20 gauge set up with a scope and stuff so we can actually get at least some kind of precision for you guys. So I'm definitely excited to see what my setup can do and to get a starting point to work off of from today's test. So for the shells I've got out here today, I brought out some of these simply because they were the cheapest 20 gauge shell on the shelf on any store that I could find in my area, which is some of the Herter's ammo, which is Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop's in-house brand name, but they are made by Winchester, so these are essentially a Winchester Super X shell just with a different box. But they are a 20 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 3/4 ounce rifled slug, moving about 1600 feet per second. And here's what one of those shells looks like. Very much your standard rifled slug with a little bit of a hollow point in there. Definitely nothing fancy about them, and they're cheap. So what kind of results can we actually get out of these? And as for the shotgun, we're going to be running those through today. I brought out my Stevens 301 20 gauge. Now, yes, this is technically the turkey model, but it doesn't mean anything other than camouflage stock, and it came with a turkey choke. Now, as you can see, I've got a Nikon inline XR scope on top. It's a 3-9x40, but technically, yes, it is a muzzleloader scope. However, it will serve the purpose for us doing some testing with this shotgun. This is not a long-term solution, and it definitely looks a little bit goofy on top of here, but it will work for our testing purposes. And as for a choke, I just threw a factory style flush improved cylinder in the gun, which is typically what most rifled slugs suggest us to use, is an improved cylinder. So we'll start here. So definitely a pretty interesting and kind of oddball combo with how this scope looks on this 301, but there hasn't been a whole lot of people testing 301s in 20 gauge when it comes to slugs. So I'm curious as to what my setup can actually do, since this is technically one of my turkey guns. But as for today's test, we're going to do it the same way we usually do a shotgun slug test on the channel. I'm going to shoot a 3-shot group at 50 yards and another 3-shot group at 100 yards. All of those shots will be through the chronograph as well, so we can get our velocity. Now, is that a perfectly scientific test or anything like that? No, but we have to work with the shells that I have available, and it will at least tell us if this combo is decent at all. So enough talking, let's get you guys set up with a view of the target and the chronograph and stuff. We'll start at 50 yards, and then we'll move out to 100, and then we'll take a look at our results and see what we actually got. Alright, so let's take a peek here at our chronograph numbers real quick before we look at our target. The boss claim was 1600 feet per second, but we did not see that. It seemed to be floating right in the high 1400s mark. Now, we do have a 26-inch barrel on that particular 301, and there's a chance that the factory probably tested them out of a 28 or something similar. So seeing a little bit lower velocity does kind of make sense considering our setup. It's probably a shorter barrel than what they tested them through. But let's go through and see what kind of numbers we actually got. So for a high, we had 1504. For a low, we had 1483. That gave us an average right at 1492 feet per second. And of course, here is all your energy numbers and stuff up on the screen for a 3/4 ounce 20 gauge slug for what kind of muzzle energy we're looking at 1492 feet per second. Our extreme spread was 21 and our standard deviation was 7. So overall here, even though we saw 108 feet per second under the box claim, they at least seem to be very consistent, especially for a very cheap lead rifled slug. So at the end of the day, although sure, I wouldn't mind seeing up around 1600 feet per second, maybe being down in the 14s might make those slugs hold together a little bit more, especially at closer ranges if you were to shoot a deer or something with them. So that is always a possibility, and at least they were very consistent. So we're not looking too bad for velocity, but what kind of accuracy did we actually get? Let's go check that out. Alright, so now let's take a peek here at what kind of accuracy we actually got. Target on the left was at 50 yards. The target on the right was at 100 yards. So we'll start over there on the left with our 50-yard target, which doesn't look too bad at all for a 20 gauge cheap rifled slug. So let's measure our 50-yard group and see what it gave us. Alright, I apologize for the blinking, my battery's running dead here, but 50 yards we had 1.73 inches, and that is from center to center on these top two holes over here, which was our farthest 2 points across. So right at 1 3/4 inches at 50 yards, I mean, that is smaller than your fist, so absolutely good enough to take a deer or something with them all day long, without a doubt. Is it as good as some of the Sabo slugs or something we've tested out of a 12 gauge? No, but hey, these are very cheap 20 gauge rifled slugs, so I'll take that. So now let's move over to our 100-yard target on the right, and I'm sure somebody is probably already wondering how we managed to get the exact same placement of the holes on both targets, and that is because I was holding for this top red dot right over here because I did not know how much bullet drop we were going to have at 100 yards. So it seems like sighted in a couple inches high at 50, I can hold pretty much dead on at 100 and be hitting right where I'm aiming. So that's definitely good to know for the future. But let's measure that 100-yard group and see what it gave us out there. All right, so that 100-yard group gave us a 3.18 inch spread. So yeah, that pretty much makes sense. I mean, we went from a 1 3/4 to a touch over a 3-inch group at 100. That's pretty much what I would expect to see after seeing that 50-yard group. And really, 3 inches at 100 yards, I mean, that's a group about the size of your fist. And if you were going to shoot a deer at 100 yards with a 20 gauge slug, which they can do it if you place your shot right, for sure, that is absolutely good enough. I wouldn't call it anything groundbreaking, but hey, for a cheap slug in a $200 shotgun, I'll take that all day long. That is good enough for whatever I would ever want to use that 301 with a slug for. That's gonna be a deer getter all day long, without a doubt. So definitely not looking too terrible here at all. I mean, for the first time I've ever ran 20 gauge slugs through that 301, I'll take it. And I think with the right slug, we can get better than that, because that is not a terrible starting point for us whatsoever. You could take that out right now and deer hunt with it the way it is. So definitely not too bad here, that's for sure. Not anything that I'm going to complain about, all things considered. Alright, and while going down to get my target, I just so happened to find one of these little gas seal base pieces that sit under the slug, and I figured I'd show you guys just so you can see what's in the shell. Definitely nothing too special or fancy to see, but it looks perfectly fine. There's no kind of damage on it or anything, so I'd say we're looking just fine here, and it seems to serve its purpose just fine for what these shells are. So I figured I'd show you guys since it's in the shell, but not really anything too special to see. Alright, y'all. Well, what did you think about those results right there? Definitely not too bad for a starting point here. That's the first set of slugs I've ran, except for just the basic zeroing of the scope on there out of that 301. And when I was zeroing, I didn't shoot for any kind of groups or anything, so I had no idea what we were going to find coming into it. So I'll take that. I mean, that is pretty well the cheapest 20 gauge rifled slugs on the store shelf with a $200 cheap single shot shotgun. I mean, I'll take that all day long. That's going to be plenty good enough to take out on a deer hunt or something with it, without a doubt. And coming into it here, I didn't really know what we were going to find shooting slugs out of a 301 20 gauge. There's really not a whole lot of people that have done it and at least shown their results or talked about their results really anywhere. So I was definitely curious as to how it would do, since it's kind of supposed to be a turkey gun. But hey, it looks like you can go get some rifled slugs and throw an improved cylinder in there and have a pretty decent little slug gun as well for a 20 gauge. So I'm not complaining for today's results. That's good enough for what I would ever need it for, but I still think we can get better with the right slug as well. Maybe a Brennecke slug or something like that. We're just gonna have to try several different ones and see what my setup actually likes. But I guess leave your thoughts in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested a 301 20 gauge with slugs? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? Is there another slug that you might want to see us test out? I don't have a rifled barrel and I don't have a rifle choke, so we can't really do Sabo slugs, but anything else, by all means leave your suggestions. And let me know, if you hunt with 20 gauge slugs, what kind of animals do you hunt? And at what kind of ranges are you comfortable shooting an animal, or a deer or a pig or something like that, with a 20 gauge rifled slug? Is it 50 yards? Is it 75? Is it 100? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it. But I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.